Story 1. The draft from the basement. I still think about how clean that patio handle looked. Not broken, not forced, not even obviously touched. Just one dry shape where a hand had been, on a pane of glass filmed over with midnight condensation. That was the part my brain couldn't settle on later. Not the police lights, not the footprints. Just that one careful, wiped place, like somebody had wanted me to know they were already familiar with the house. My name's Nolan Mercer. I'm 42, I work in software compliance, and I'm the kind of person who likes things done the same way every night. I know it's 14 steps from my driveway to the front door, 6 from the foyer to the hall closet, 9 more to the kitchen. Early March, cold for the suburbs but dry. Just after 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I'd wrapped a conference call in the home office and was doing what I always did when my wife, Elise, was traveling. I shut the laptop, checked the thermostat, turned off the pendant lights over the island, then walked the ground floor and locked everything before bed. The neighborhood still smelled new, drywall dust and treated lumber, because half the houses in our development were sitting empty with sales signs out front. I actually liked that about it. Quiet streets, clean lines, heavy deadbolts, no surprises. The front lock was fine. Garage entry, fine. The slider to the back patio was the last stop, and the deadbolt was sitting in the open position. I stood there for a second with my hand on the frame, looking at the glass. The whole pane had that thin, cloudy film of condensation from the cool night air pressing against the conditioned air inside. Except around the handle. Around the handle it was clear, as if somebody had wiped just that part dry. I remember letting out a little breath through my nose and thinking, okay, that's me. I let the dog out around 11. I was half listening to a client complain about audit language. I probably brushed it with my sleeve and forgot to throw the bolt. That explanation made enough sense that I used it. That's the thing people miss later, when they ask why you didn't panic sooner. You don't jump to intruder. Not when there's a simpler answer right there. I'd lived in houses all my life. Locks got missed. Glass got smudged. I turned the deadbolt until it gave me that familiar solid snap and stood there another second anyway, listening to the central air kick on. The vents pushed that dry, cool smell through the kitchen, and somewhere under it I caught a faint draft from the hallway that led to the basement door. Nothing dramatic, just a colder strip of air over my bare feet. I told myself the system was balancing pressure through the returns. I went on with the check. In the dining area, one of the oak chairs was pulled out farther than the others. Not much, maybe 3 inches, but it was exact, almost measured, and when I glanced from the chair to the doorway, I realized it lined up perfectly with the opening into my office. Somebody sitting there could have seen straight to my desk and the bright rectangle of my screen. I stopped with my hand on the chair back. Then I laughed once, quietly, because I knew exactly how stupid that felt. We had movers in and out for a week when we first closed, contractors after that, cleaners, cable people. Chairs get nudged. Floors settle. Human beings make small asymmetries all day long. I pushed it in with 2 fingers and heard the legs scrape softly over the wood. I even went a step further and checked the smart home app on my phone, mostly to prove to myself that I was being thorough, not nervous. The router panel loaded, pale blue in the dark kitchen, and there was an extra connected device I didn't recognize. Not a model name, not a phone brand. Just local. Connected for 4 hours. I stared at it longer than I want to admit. Then the professional part of my brain took over. Device labeling errors happen. Firmware updates do weird things. Guest devices can display incorrectly if they don't broadcast properly. I work with systems all day. Unknown doesn't mean malicious. I told myself I'd reboot the router in the morning and went to set the phone down. That's when the basement door clicked shut. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. The door usually stuck because the frame swelled whenever the weather turned damp. You had to lean a shoulder into it to get it to latch. But from the hall behind me came a soft, neat sound. Just the finished click of a door closing properly. I turned and looked. The hall light was off, so the door was only a darker rectangle in the dark, but it was fully shut. For a few seconds I didn't move. The air from the vents kept running, and I could hear the faint hollow echo of it moving through the unfinished basement ceiling below. Then I made myself walk over. I put my hand on the knob and opened the door. The smell hit first, cool concrete and sawdust, and that mineral dampness basements always hold no matter how new the house is. I reached for the switch and stopped. The overhead basement light had burned out the week before. I hadn't replaced it yet. I remember being irritated by that, of all things. Irritated that I was standing there at 2 in the morning with a dead bulb and a phone in my hand, acting like a man in a commercial for home security. I took the flashlight from the junk drawer. Not my phone flashlight, the actual aluminum one I keep beside the batteries. Competence is funny that way. You think if you do the right thing in the right order, reality will reward you for it. I went back to the top of the stairs and listened. Nothing. No shifting, no breathing, no movement from below. Just the air system and a tiny tick from the house settling. I called out, firm voice, controlled. If somebody's down there, speak now. Nothing. My pulse had started beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but I still hadn't crossed over into fear. Not fully. Annoyance, maybe. A readiness I recognized from work crises. From the few bad nights in my 20s when I had to handle things quickly and without drama. I leaned forward and sent the flashlight beam down the stairs. The beam washed over raw concrete walls, stacked paint cans, holiday boxes, the folded treadmill we still hadn't moved upstairs. Then it caught the steps themselves. There was a fine skin of construction dust on the treads because the basement ceiling still needed finish work. I saw one set of prints first, normal enough, headed down. Then I saw the second set. They faced up. Not climbing, not descending. Just planted on the fourth step from the bottom, overlapping slightly with the downward prints. The edges softened in the dust. Somebody had stood there, turned toward the top of the stairs, and stayed in one place long enough to mark it clearly. Long enough to listen. Long enough to hear me crossing the kitchen, moving chairs, checking doors, standing on the other side of that basement door trying to explain my own house back to myself. Every part of me went cold and functional at the same time. My fingers tightened around the flashlight until the knurling bit into my palm. I kept the beam on the stairs, waiting for movement that didn't come. Then I understood something so simple it made my stomach drop. If those prints were there, and the basement door had closed from the other side, then whoever had been on that fourth step had known the layout of the house. They'd known how sound traveled. They'd known I was alone long enough to stay quiet and let me circle overhead. I backed away. Slow at first, then faster when one of the lower steps gave a faint wooden pop, as if weight had shifted onto it below the beam. I swung the light down harder and caught nothing except dust and the black mouth of the basement. I grabbed my phone and hit Elise first out of instinct, then canceled before it rang. Useless. I switched to emergency and got no call through. Just dead silence. Then the line dropped. Later the police said overloaded local service, weak indoor signal, any number of reasons. In the moment it felt deliberate. I wanted my keys. My keys were in the ceramic bowl by the front door. That meant crossing the foyer with my back to the hallway. I remember how loud the floor sounded under me. Every step sharp in that new house, the acoustics carrying everywhere. Halfway there I heard it. Not footsteps. A soft drag from the hall, like fabric brushing painted drywall. My chest tightened so hard I had to take air in through my mouth. I set the flashlight on the kitchen counter because I suddenly couldn't stand the idea of advertising where my hands were. Then I walked, not ran, to the bowl, took my keys and opened the front door. I didn't look back. That's the detail people always want to challenge, like turning around would have solved anything. I stepped out, pulled the door shut behind me, and locked it from the outside with my hand shaking so badly I missed the keyhole the first time. The porch light washed the driveway in that flat yellow Builder-grade glow. 14 steps to the car. I know because I counted them. I drove to the 24-hour gas station near the highway, parked right under the brightest canopy light, and called the police from there with my hands leaving damp marks on the steering wheel. They searched the house before sunrise. They didn't find a person. They found disturbed dust in the basement, a section of insulation shifted near the crawl access, and enough cigarette smell down there that one of the officers asked if I'd been storing old furniture. I don't smoke. Neither does Elise. My office window had no signs of entry. Nothing valuable was missing. My laptop sat exactly where I'd left it, along with the tablet, the watch charger, the spare cash in the junk drawer, all of it. The detective said maybe somebody had gotten in during construction months ago and come back knowing the place would be easy. He said maybe they were scared off. He said a lot of maybes. I slept in a hotel for a week, then in my own house with every light on, and now I can't go to bed anywhere without checking whatever dust or lint or tracked grit has settled on the floor to see if anything moved through it before I did. What I still can't make fit in my head is the motive. That's the word I come back to because it's the only one that sounds adult enough to say out loud. Why spend hours in a basement under a house full of visible electronics and unlocked opportunity, just waiting for the owner to finish work and go to sleep? Why wipe one handle clean and leave everything else? Why sit under somebody's kitchen listening to the sounds they make when they think they're safe? Sometimes, right before I turn off the downstairs lights, I catch myself staring at the seam around the basement door and wondering if the real plan was never to steal anything at all, and whether the person on that fourth step went into the wrong house or exactly the right one. I sold that place 6 months later. I told people the market was good and the commute was annoying, which sounded reasonable enough that nobody pushed. The truth is more embarrassing and a lot more specific. If I wake up in the night and need water, I don't just walk downstairs anymore. I stand at the top of whatever staircase I'm nearest and listen first, the way you listen for a person who already knows your routine. That's probably why the next story bothered me as much as it did. Because once you've understood that a locked house can still be shared with someone you didn't invite, every ordinary object by a front door starts looking like evidence. Story 2. The second key. I knew something was wrong before I even took my shoes off. Not because of a noise, not because of a broken lock, nothing that clean. It was an umbrella. Just a black umbrella dripping into a ceramic stand by my door that I was absolutely sure had been empty when I left for work. I stood there soaked through, restaurant apron in my tote bag, rainwater running down my wrists, staring at that umbrella like it was waiting for me to say I remembered it. My name's Kellen Price. I was 21 when this happened, living in a ground floor apartment because it was the cheapest thing I could afford near campus. I hated being alone there, honestly. I kept a baseball bat behind my bedroom door because my older cousin told me everybody should have something solid in reach, but I'd never touched it except to move it when I vacuumed. This was late October, just after midnight. Rain coming down so hard it made the brick courtyard outside look white under the parking lot lights. I'd worked a double shift at a downtown restaurant, missed the earlier bus, and walked the last stretch from the stop with my shoes filling up every other step. All I wanted was a shower and maybe 4 hours of sleep before my morning class. The apartment smelled the way it always did after rain, stale cooking oil from somebody's vent mixed with wet concrete and that humid, trapped air the painted shut windows held onto. I shoved the door closed with my hip and looked at the umbrella stand again. Black umbrella, cheap curved handle, beads of water still sliding off the fabric. I actually said, "No," under my breath, then immediately started explaining it away to myself. Maybe Maya from upstairs borrowed my place to wait out the storm. Maybe the maintenance guy came in for something and left it. Maybe I'd seen it before and just forgotten because I was tired enough to cry. I was doing that thing where you throw possible answers at a problem so fast you don't have to feel the problem itself. Then I looked up and saw the television in the living room glowing blue. Not on a channel, not paused, just that blank no-signal screen throwing cold light across the couch. I stopped in the entry with my wet sleeve stuck to my arm. The old building had power surges all the time. Everybody knew that. The microwave clock reset at least twice a week. So I told myself the TV must have kicked on after one of those weird flickers, and I believed that for maybe 5 seconds. Then I noticed the volume bar on the screen. Muted. I never muted it. I always powered it off. I set my keys down as quietly as I could, which should have been my first honest clue that I wasn't buying my own explanation anymore. The plumbing in the walls hummed. Somebody upstairs thudded across their floor. Rain hammered the outside brick so hard it covered smaller sounds, the kind that tell you if you're alone or not. I moved through the living room and clicked the television off. The screen snapped black and my apartment felt smaller immediately. The bathroom door was open. The shower curtain was pulled all the way closed. I leave it bunched to the side. Every time. My mother drilled that into me when I first moved out because mildew grosses me out and because a closed shower curtain in an empty bathroom always looked wrong to me, even before this. I stood in the doorway with one hand still on my backpack strap, staring at the yellowed vinyl curtain hanging straight. There was no sound from behind it. No feet. No breathing. I told myself if I was really worried, I'd see shoes underneath. I looked. Nothing. So I crossed the tile and yanked it back hard enough to make the rings scrape. Empty tub. Dry too. Not a drop anywhere. I laughed once, but it came out thin and weird. That should have been the end. Empty shower, stupid TV, random umbrella, old building. A chain of annoying coincidences. I wanted it to be that so badly that I actually started my normal routine. I peeled off my wet hoodie, kicked my shoes near the heater vent, and headed to the bedroom. I was already planning how fast I could shower and still make it to class in the morning. The closet door was cracked open about 2 inches. Not wide, just enough. One wire hanger inside was moving, barely, tapping the back wall in a tiny, regular rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. My mouth went dry so fast I had to swallow twice. I stood there looking at the gap and trying to build something ordinary out of it. Air current. That's what I went with first. I had just opened the front door. Storm air, pressure change. Hangers move. Doors shift on bad tracks. My brain was working so hard I could feel it. I actually took a step toward the closet to prove it to myself. That's when I saw the footprint on the rug. Muddy, half-formed, darkening the beige fibers near the side of my bed. Bigger than my foot. Pointing inward, toward the empty shadow under the frame. I don't know how long I stared at that one print. Maybe a second. Maybe 10. Time gets stupid when your body decides before your mind does. My hands had started shaking. Not dramatic movie shaking, just enough that my keys, still in my fist for no reason, clicked softly together. I told myself there were 100 explanations. The maintenance guy, a leak check, me tracking in mud and forgetting. None of them fit the direction of the print. None of them fit the umbrella. None of them fit the muted TV. I backed up until the edge of the mattress touched behind my knees. My bedside lamp was right there. One click and the floor under the bed would light up. I reached out, not taking my eyes off that strip of darkness beneath the frame. My fingers got within an inch of the switch. A hand came out from under the bed and unplugged the lamp. It was fast and casual, like somebody reaching behind a hotel nightstand for their phone charger. Big hand, pale knuckles, dirt in the creases. The cord slid across the wall with a dry little sound and the room stayed dark. I made a noise I have never heard from myself before. Not a scream at first, more like all the air in my chest trying to leave at once. I kicked backwards so hard my heel hit the wall, then scrambled over the mattress on my hands and knees. The box spring groaned. Something under the bed moved with it, a heavy shift that made the frame shiver. I went for the bat behind the door and almost missed it because my fingers were so slick. When I got it, I swung at the doorway blindly, full force, because that was the only direction I could imagine a body coming from. The bat hit the frame with a crack that shot up my arms. I ran. I hit the hall in socks, almost fell on the wet tile by the entry, then yanked my apartment door open and started pounding on the neighbors' doors with both fists. I was screaming words, but I don't remember what they were. Help, maybe. Somebody. Please. My throat hurt instantly and I kept going. Doors opened one by one. Mrs. Alvarez in her robe first, then the brothers from the corner unit, then a guy I only knew as Devin from 2 floors up because he was staying with his girlfriend. Somebody pulled me back behind them when I pointed at my apartment. Somebody else called the police. I stood in the hall with the bat across my chest and my pulse hitting so hard in my ribs I thought I might throw up. When the officers cleared the unit, the bedroom window was still locked from the inside. So was the bathroom. No one under the bed. No one in the closet. They found damp marks on the floor near the entry and one partial print on the rug. They found the umbrella. They found my lamp unplugged. One of the brothers kept saying he thought he heard a door farther down the hall a few seconds before I started screaming. But in that building doors were always opening, always closing. Everything blended together there. I broke the lease the next day. My landlord fought me until the police report came through. then suddenly got very cooperative, which should have told me something by itself. I moved into a place on the third floor with no space under the bed and no shared courtyard outside the windows. I still can't stand ground floor blinds at night. I don't care how expensive the apartment is or how safe the neighborhood looks. If somebody can stand at your window and breathe on the glass, I don't want it. The part that never settled was the key. 2 weeks after I moved out, one of the office girls let it slip that the building superintendent had authorized a duplicate of my unit key while I was at work. She assumed I knew. I didn't. And when I pushed, she got quiet and said the pickup signature wasn't readable. Just initials. So that's it. That's the question I still have. Not whether someone was in my apartment because they were. Not whether they were under the bed because that cord didn't unplug itself. I want to know who signed off on that second key, and who stood at my front office countercom as anything and took it, already knowing exactly where I kept the bat I'd never used. I don't tell people the whole story anymore because it sounds thinner out loud than it felt in that room. I just say I had a bad apartment once and leave it there. But I still check under hotel beds with all the lights on before I put my bag down, and I never leave umbrellas in a stand by the door. They go in the tub where I can see them. Maybe that's irrational. Maybe not. Either way, after that night I started noticing how many people talk about being watched from outside, from parking lots or windows or dark sidewalks, and how much worse it is when the person isn't outside at all. The next one happened to someone who thought distance would fix that feeling. Open land, long sight lines, porch light always on. Still didn't help. Story 3. Just like the mailman. The first thing that bothered me was how careful he was being with the gravel. I didn't know that was what bothered me at the time. I thought I was just noticing it because there wasn't much else to notice on a quiet Sunday morning. But I can still see him stepping out of that white truck with the little box in his hand, then angling off the driveway and onto the grass shoulder so his shoes wouldn't make a sound coming up to my porch. My name is Laurel Pritchard. I'm 64, retired from the county library system, and I live alone because I want to, not because anybody left or died or anything people always assume when they hear that. My farmhouse sits off County Road 9 on 10 acres that used to be soybean land before my grandparents sold most of it off. I kept the house and enough property for a big garden, a woodshed, and a little more peace than town ever gave me. I leave the porch light on every night, partly because I like the look of it on the white railings, partly because the nearest neighbors are a good stretch away and everybody feels better seeing one steady light along that road. This was a Sunday in late May, around 9 in the morning. I'd made coffee, folded back the local paper, and was waiting on a package with tomato steaks and pruning twine I had ordered for the garden beds. The windows were open just enough to let in that wet earth smell you get after an overnight rain, and the whole house had that old pine warmth to it that made everything feel settled. So when the truck came up the driveway, I was pleased. Just ordinary pleased. I even remember thinking the driver was saving my gravel from rutting by staying on the grass, which tells you how committed I was to reading it kindly. He had on brown shorts and a collared shirt, standard courier colors, but the logo on the chest had been picked off somehow. Same with the hat. Not covered. Removed. Little frayed stitches where the patches should have been. I noticed, frowned, and answered myself right away. Seasonal help, I thought. Hand-me-down uniform. Side contractor. Somebody trying to get through the week without buying new shirts. People do what they have to do. He climbed the porch and knocked. Loud. 3 clean knocks. Then he waited exactly 3 seconds and tried the handle. Not jiggled it by accident. Not leaned against it. He turned it like he expected it to open. I stood up from the kitchen table so fast my chair legs dragged over the wood. Just a minute. Coming. I called, mostly annoyed. Older house, older locks, and I was still in my slippers. There was a half-beat of silence from the porch. Then my own voice came back through the door. Just a minute coming. Same pitch, same rhythm, same little lift on the last word. Not close. Exact. I stopped in the middle of the kitchen with my hand on the back of the chair. All at once I was aware of how big the windows were in that room. How clear the sight lines ran out across the side yard and down the drive. How visible I must have been every morning with my coffee by the paper. Then I did what I always do, which is try to make a stranger's behavior mean less than it obviously does. Maybe he was joking. Maybe he had one of those voices that can copy anything. Maybe he was embarrassed about trying the handle and decided to smooth it over badly. I stood still long enough that he knocked again, lighter this time. When I finally looked through the side pane in the door, the porch was empty. I actually felt relieved. There you go, I thought. Weird young man, poor judgment, no real issue. I watched through the front window as he walked back toward the truck with the package still in his hand. Then, instead of setting it by the porch or returning to the vehicle, he stepped off the drive again and started along the side of the house. There's a path there, but not a formal one. Just the route I take from the woodshed when I bring in armloads of firewood in the winter. It curves around a patch of damp ground, then narrows between the rain barrel and the lilac bush, then comes up under the side window by the sink. It is specific in the way personal habits are specific. You learn it with your body over years. He followed it perfectly. I told myself that meant nothing. If you can see a worn line in grass, you follow it. That's normal. So I stayed where I was and watched him pass the window, box in hand, expression blank. He didn't look in at me. He kept going toward the back, and by the time I reached the mudroom door and locked it, I couldn't hear him anymore. True rural quiet has weight to it. When sound stops out there, it doesn't feel empty. It feels like something is holding itself still. I waited maybe 2 minutes before I checked the back windows. No truck in the drive. No man in the yard. Just wind moving the wet tops of the field grass and one crow working at something by the fence line. My shoulders came down. I even sat back at the table and tried to read again, though I realized after a paragraph that I hadn't taken in a single word. The coffee had gone cooler than I liked, but I kept sipping it anyway because ordinary motions make you feel less foolish. Then there was another knock. This time it came from the side window over the sink. Not the glass itself. The wood frame. 3 dull little taps. I looked up and saw him standing in the yard about 20 feet away with no box in his hands now. He wasn't smiling. Wasn't frowning either. Just standing there in that stripped uniform with his head tipped very slightly, the way people do when they're waiting to see if you've noticed them. I raised a hand toward the window, not quite a wave, more a what is it gesture. He copied it. Same angle, same hesitation. My skin prickled all over my arms in this dry, crawling way that had nothing to do with temperature. Still, even then, I went looking for a nice explanation. Maybe he was simple. Maybe he was anxious. Maybe he thought I hadn't understood there was a signature required. I opened the inner latch but left the screen shut. "Can I help you?" He looked at my mouth while I spoke, not my eyes. Then he said, in my voice again, "Can I help you?" I shut the window. That was the first real break in the morning, the point where I stopped trying to be friendly and started moving room to room checking locks. Front door, mudroom, both back windows, pantry door, though nobody uses that. My hands were steady enough, but inside I had this floating feeling, like I'd stood up too fast and the room hadn't quite caught up. I told myself I would call the company, report the driver, maybe get his plate first. By the time I reached the living room front windows, the truck was back in the driveway. Only now it was parked facing out, ready to leave, and he was sitting behind the wheel looking straight at the house. Not lurking, not hiding, just waiting. I pulled the curtain a little wider and he lifted one hand from the steering wheel. Same small gesture I'd made at the sink. Then he drove away. That should have been the end of it. If I'm honest, part of me treated it like it was. I told myself he was odd and rude and maybe unstable, but gone. I even called my friend Miriam and made light of it while we discussed irises and whether the rain had flattened the peonies too early. Saying it aloud made it sound less sharp. She told me to call the depot anyway. I said I would. Instead, I tidied the kitchen and looked out every few minutes while pretending I wasn't looking out. An hour later, I was carrying the coffee mug to the sink when movement caught at the far edge of the side yard. He was back. Not on the porch. Out by the shed. Standing where the grass meets the dirt strip I walk every evening when I bring wood in before sunset. He had the little box again somehow. Or maybe another one. From that distance, it was hard to tell. What I could tell was that he wasn't wandering. He was following the path of my own routine, one measured step at a time, glancing down now and then as if checking his footing against something only he could see. I crouched below the window without meaning to. My knees just bent. I stayed there listening to my own breathing and to the faint tick of the kitchen clock over the stove. When I rose again slowly, he was closer to the house. Close enough that I could see the frayed threads where the chest logo had been. Close enough that I could see him stop, reach into his pocket, and take out a small black notebook. He opened it with both hands, turned a page, looked at his watch, nodded to himself. Then he drew a line through something written there. The sun through the window hit the page for just a second. Enough. I saw my own life in somebody else's handwriting. 9 o'clock, breakfast by the window. My coffee mug slipped in my hand and knocked against the counter. He looked up immediately, straight to the window where I was standing. Not startled. Not guilty. More like we'd finally reached the part of the morning he'd expected. I stepped back so fast I hit the table with my hip. My mouth had gone dry to the point I could barely get words out, but I got my phone and called the county sheriff anyway. Out where I live, you don't call and expect an instant response. You call, then you keep talking so the distance doesn't swallow you whole before the engine starts. The dispatcher stayed calm. I liked her for that. I told her there was a man on my property, impersonating a delivery driver, watching my house, carrying notes about my schedule. She asked if he was attempting entry. I said not at that second, which sounded ridiculous the moment I said it, like I was downgrading my own emergency for politeness. She told me to get to an interior room if I could. I said the bathroom because it's the only room in the house without a window. Then I made the mistake of looking one more time before I went. He hadn't moved closer. He was still in the yard, notebook in hand, looking not at the house now but at my woodshed. Then the porch, then the road, as if comparing all of it to whatever he'd written down already. When the distant siren finally lifted over the fields, very faint at first, he closed the notebook, slid it into his pocket, and walked back to the truck with the loose, easy posture of a man leaving a hardware store. No rush, no backward glance. Just gone in a cloud of pale road dust by the time the deputy turned in. They never found him. The company said the truck description didn't match any active route vehicle in the area. The sheriff's deputy took my statement seriously, which I appreciated, but serious doesn't mean useful. He drove the property line, checked for prints, asked if I'd had contractors, ex-boyfriends, disputes, anybody who might know my habits. I kept thinking about that notebook while he talked. Not because of my name. My name wasn't on the page as far as I know. It was the format of it. Time, action, location. Someone had spent real time reducing a life to repeatable points. Since then, whenever a vehicle passes slow on County Road 9 and kicks up dust in the morning light, I leave whatever's in my hands right where it is and go lock myself in the bathroom with the vent humming overhead until I hear it pass. There's a mug with a coffee ring on my table right now because I still do it without thinking. People laugh when I say I keep the porch light on for the neighbors. That's still true. But if I'm honest, I leave it on because I want anyone coming up that road to know I already know what a watched house feels like. And I think about that notebook more than I think about the man himself. Because if one page was my breakfast, my porch, my woodshed path, then the question isn't whether he meant to come back. It's how many other lonely houses along that highway are sitting inside that same neat little book, each one broken down into times and windows and the way a voice sounds through a closed door. I used to believe isolation made a place safer. Fewer strangers, fewer accidents, fewer chances for random harm. Now I think isolation just gives attention room to grow. The last story isn't about someone fighting a person off or calling the sheriff in time. It's worse in a quieter way. It's about getting home, seeing a few harmless details out of place, and only later realizing those details were the outline of a week you didn't actually spend alone. Story 4. Before the dust settled. The clean space in the dust was the first thing I couldn't explain. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. That's what gets me. If you'd walked into my apartment that afternoon without context, you might not have noticed it at all. The whole place was powdered white from renovation debris. Countertops, bookshelves, the edge of the television, all of it. And behind the sofa there was this one long rectangular patch where no dust had settled, as if something human-sized had occupied that exact strip while I was gone. My name is Dev Suri. I'm 31. I work as a freelance data analyst, and my schedule is bad enough that most of my neighbors probably assume I don't sleep. I take contracts from clients in different time zones, which means there are plenty of weeks when I'm making coffee at midnight and answering emails at 4 in the morning. I was living on the 4th floor of a high-rise downtown while the building was going through major structural renovations, the kind that covered the hallways in plastic and made everything smell like plaster dust, solvent, and hot copper from old pipes getting opened up. I had just come back from a week out of state visiting family. Early August, humid outside, stale and powdery inside. I dropped my suitcase by the entry, looked around at the white film over everything, and felt the normal annoyance of coming home to a place that already needed cleaning. The first item I registered was a half-finished plastic bottle of water on the kitchen island. Cap off, water line maybe a third of the way down, one little crescent of dust stuck to the rim. I stared at it and immediately filed it under me. Pre-trip chaos. Last-minute packing. I was rushing for an Uber and probably left it there without noticing. That wasn't denial so much as classification. I do that with work all day. You see an anomaly, assign the most likely cause, move on unless the next piece of data disagrees. Then I noticed the charger in the hallway outlet. Cheap white cord, not mine, wrapped neatly around a generic wall block and plugged in shoulder height beside the coat hooks. I own black braided cables because they last longer. I stood there with the suitcase handle still in my hand and felt the first real snag in the logic. This wasn't memory failure. I knew my own stuff, so I unplugged it, turned it over, looked for a logo, and set it on the island next to the water bottle like I was building a little evidence row for myself. Unfamiliar charger. Noted. The bathroom gave me the next piece. The mirror had horizontal streaks through the dust and faint mineral spotting, the kind you get when somebody wipes steam off with the flat of their hand or a towel edge. But the tub was completely dry. Towels dry too. No dampness in the grout. No soap film. Nothing recent enough to justify the marks. That was the moment my mood changed from tired to focused. Not afraid, not yet. Focused. I walked the apartment more slowly after that, taking in details instead of looking past them. Construction thudded somewhere above, distant enough to sound underwater. Plastic sheeting over the exterior windows breathed in and out slightly with the air system, making the whole place feel temporary, exposed like I was living inside packaging. Back in the living room, I looked at the dust again. The rectangular space behind the sofa wasn't the size of a moving box. It was too long and too narrow, about the footprint of a person lying down or sitting with their back against the couch. I crouched to get the angle right and saw there were lighter smudges around it where dust had been disturbed and resettled. That was the first time I felt a small pulse of something colder than curiosity. Still, I didn't leap to intruder. My building had contractors in and out constantly. The superintendent had master access. Work crews moved things, sat things down, charged tools. If I was going to escalate, I wanted cleaner proof than a dusty rectangle and a weird charger. So I opened my desktop to check messages from clients and maybe distract myself with normal work. The machine woke, browser still open. My email tabs were where I'd left them. So was the spreadsheet I'd closed out before my trip. But the history panel showed pages visited over the past week, local news sites, transit updates, 2 social media pages I don't use, all accessed across the exact days I was in another state eating barbecue at my uncle's house and sleeping on a sofa bed. I leaned in close enough that the dust on the monitor frame rubbed my sleeve. The timestamps were regular. Morning, afternoon, late night. Not a one-off accidental wake. Someone had been using my computer as if it belonged to them and they were mildly bored. That was enough for me to stop pretending it was one explanation. I checked the front door frame, no damage. Bedroom window, locked. I even looked at the vents because part of my brain was still in problem-solving mode, still trying to map access points and rule out impossible ones. In the bedroom, the closet door was fully shut, which was normal. The bed looked normal. My laundry basket had shifted maybe an inch from where I'd left it, but now I couldn't trust my own sense of placement anymore. That bothered me more than the obvious things. Once your memory becomes one of the variables, nothing feels stable. I went back to the kitchen island and looked at the little lineup. Water bottle. Charger. My own apartment key. Dust on the counter except where those items had been moved. I started photographing everything with my phone. Not because I thought I'd need the pictures, but because documenting facts calms me down. That's another work habit. Freeze the state of the system before you change it. I took shots of the mirror, the charger, the dust rectangle, the browser history. Then I opened the security camera app. I'd installed a motion-activated camera facing the main living area a few months earlier after a package theft on my floor. Not because I was especially worried, more because it seemed efficient. The event log loaded. 0 motion alerts for the entire week I was away. At first that actually soothed me. There I thought, good. False alarm. Contractors maybe came in with authorization, but no prolonged occupancy. Then the calm didn't hold because 0 events made less sense, not more. Renovation crews had been in the hall daily. Plastic over the windows shifted constantly. Even I could set it off walking from the kitchen to the couch. A whole silent week was wrong. I started checking settings. Sensitivity unchanged. Notifications enabled. Timestamp synced. The log stayed empty until the very bottom. One entry recorded 10 minutes after I'd come in with my suitcase. I tapped it. The video opened on my living room from the camera's angle near the bookshelf. There I was in the kitchen with my back turned, leaning over the island where the charger and water bottle sat. I watched myself on the screen, a version of me from 10 minutes ago, ordinary and unaware. Then the bedroom closet door opened. Not wide, just enough. A man stepped out, closing it softly behind him with one hand. He was wearing dark clothes dusted at the knees with white plaster. No mask, no rush, no visible weapon. He stood there in the doorway and looked at the back of my head. He didn't advance, didn't reach for anything. He just watched. The clip had no sound, but I knew the room well enough to imagine it. The low drill pulses from above, the air system, my own bag zipper opening while that person stood maybe 15 feet behind me. After 3 or 4 seconds, he walked across the frame, unlocked the front door, and slipped out into the hall without once looking at the camera. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was frozen with the phone in both hands, and the next I was in the bedroom doorway staring at the closet like it had become a person. My pulse was slamming so hard in my chest that it made the image on the screen tremble. I yanked the closet open. Empty. Just shirts, a suitcase, a storage bin, the dark seam of the wall in the back. But the air inside smelled different from the rest of the room, warmer, stale in a way lived-in spaces get when they aren't ventilated. On the carpet behind a stack of shoeboxes was a compressed patch in the pile, rectangular and flattened the same way the dust had been behind the sofa. That's when all the harmless details broke open at once. The water bottle wasn't something I left behind. It was something he had been drinking. The mirror wasn't old streaking. Someone had showered there. The browser history wasn't casual snooping in passing. It was routine. The clean strip behind the sofa wasn't from contractors moving furniture. It was where a body had been occupying space in my apartment, probably for hours at a time, maybe days, with a direct line of sight toward the kitchen and the front door. And the camera log being empty wasn't reassuring. It meant someone had either known how to delete the week cleanly or had stood in this exact room learning the app well enough to do it. I zipped my suitcase shut with clothes half hanging out of it. Not neatly, just enough to carry. I didn't call building security. I didn't call the police from inside. I didn't bother locking the apartment. That part surprises people, but by then the lock felt symbolic at best. I took the elevator down to the lobby with my phone open to hotel listings and kept staring at the live time on the camera app like maybe the clip would rewind and show me a different ending if I refreshed often enough. I checked into a hotel across town 35 minutes later and sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise with the room lights on and the suitcase still zipped by the door. The building management said they were investigating. The police took the report, copied the video, asked practical questions about exes and cleaners and contractors and whether anyone else had codes. Nobody gave me an explanation that felt bigger than the facts. That's part of what still bothers me. There was no dramatic break-in, no shattered lock, no wild chase down a hall. Just a week of my apartment being used by a person patient enough to leave almost nothing and neat enough to erase most of what he did. I moved out before the renovation dust settled. Since then, every time I check a security feed, I look at the live timestamp first. I have to make sure the image I'm trusting is actually happening now and not 10 minutes too late. And that's the part that stays unfinished. Not who he was, though I'd like to know that too. Not even how he got in, because in a building full of contractors and temporary access, there are too many possible doors. What I can't stop circling is why he deleted the footage from the 5 days he appears to have lived in my apartment, but left that last clip sitting there for me to find. He knew where the camera was. He knew enough to clear the week. So why let me see those few seconds of him leaving the closet and watching me from behind? Sometimes I think it was a mistake. Other times I think the missing part is the point, and that the clean rectangle behind my sofa only looked the size of one person because whatever wasn't erased from that week is still the part one haven't thought to measure correctly. I still travel for work. I still come home late. I still unpack in a hurry and leave things where they land. Most habits survive even after something like that. But there's one thing I can't seem to stop doing. If I come back to a room and the air feels slightly warmer than it should, I pause before I turn on any lights and look for the place dust didn't settle.